Good morning, good afternoon, dear Yasmin, dear panelists, dear participants. I am FIDIC. I am the Director General of CICA, for those who do not know me yet. So we are very pleased to see you again for the second episode of our CICA DRBF series. We hope you have enjoyed the first one, and together with Yasmin, we are making our best efforts to make those webinars rich in terms of concrete practical experiences that are shared by the different parties' representatives. These webinars are only a part of our collaboration between CICA and DRBF, as we are also currently jointly drafting a position paper on dispute board process recommendations for all the stakeholders in the industry for dispute boards to be more efficient and thus better accepted by all the parties involved in order to, in fine, successfully achieve the construction projects. So 2 weeks ago, the DRBF president, Jeremy Glover, presented the draft paper at the MDB's Heads of Procurement in London. And with the CICA delegation, we had the opportunity to present it specifically to the African Development Bank procurement team in Abidjan. We had the opportunity to receive some feedback. We also jointly organized in Abidjan a conference and training workshop for the development of local pools of experts. We will keep you informed of our upcoming joint initiatives between CICA and DRBF, but I will now leave the mic to Yasmin, who will introduce this webinar more in details. So thank you, Yasmin.
Thank you, Fanny, for the great introduction. Hello, everyone. This is Yasemin Cinel. For those who do not know me, I'm DRBF Region 2 past president. And it is a pleasure today, again, to have our audience with a great interest and enthusiasm, as we have received in our first webinar. We are very pleased to contribute and continue our collaboration with CICA in joint events, webinars, and so on. As you know, in our first webinar, we set the scene. So we made the general introduction to the dispute board process and the dispute boards in general. We hope that today we will delve into a bit more detail, and we will be able to address hot topics and key issues about the appointment matter. So for logistics, just please feel free to drop your questions throughout the panel and the webinar in the Q&A section of the webinar. Our panelists will be able to pick them up either through their discussion or at the end of the session in the Q&A section. To begin with, I'll make a very brief introduction to the issue, and then without further ado, I will introduce our panelists. So this webinar is about dispute board appointments. We all know that great care should be taken in choosing your dispute board member, because that will be a member that will function throughout your project, as we have said in the first webinar, and that member should bring benefit to the project. But how do we choose it? There are some basic criteria that we should consider, and our panelists will, of course, delve into detail on these. But let us have, as an introduction, what are those criteria? Experience, knowledge about the specific type of construction for the project, interpretation of contracts-related experience, fluency in the contract language, experience, again, as a team member of the boards. And that requires inevitably social skills, communication skills, and so on. Availability, of course, is another thing, because it is a continuous requirement to be available. Clear expression, clear writing in order to help the parties better. Physical well-being, because that is a long process as well, and it entails travel to the sites that the project is taking place. And finally, of course, for each project, there is the impartiality, independence-related issues that we should consider in mind. Once those criteria are more or less established in our minds, there are two ways. You either jointly conduct this process with your counterpart as employer or contractor, or you disagree. very differently from the tribunals in arbitration, where you can appoint your member without asking your counterpart or having their approval. In the dispute board process, the dispute board agreement is a tripartite agreement. So everyone should consent. It goes by agreement of all parties. Therefore, in case you agree to jointly conduct this process, there are selection issues that in this webinar we will be focusing on. And in case you cannot agree to jointly conduct the process, there is the next step of going to the appointing authority, which also has some other consideration and some practical observation that it requires that we will tackle in our next webinar in this series. Now, circling back to this one, let's assume that we managed as contractor and employer to agree and said that, okay, we are going to have a joint nomination. We will nominate our members. Then, how do we find these people? What do we consider in this research? What profession they must have? What nationality they must have, if whether or not this is a concern? Do we have interviews? How do we conduct this process? Basically, we will have these issues in mind, for the panel discussion that we will shortly have. So moving into our panels, for those who already participated to our first webinar, the panel is structured in a similar way with the first one. We aim to have a high-level practical input of the people. We have very distinguished panelists that we will shortly introduce. And accordingly, we will have the insights from the contractor side, employer side, and a little bit, and moderating two of them, the dispute board side, in relation with these dispute board appointment matters. To that end, we would like to go to the introduction phase. Shall we, Fanny?
Yes, sure, Yasmin, thank you. So first we will present Aisha. So Aisha Nadar is a president-elect for DRBF Region 2 Board of Directors, and she's an engineer. She has been actively involved in all phases of the negotiation and implementation of large-scale cross-border infrastructure and defense programs for over 30 years. Her procurement and international contract management experience includes holding senior-level positions in the US, the Middle East, and Europe. She regularly advises clients on strategic procurement planning, contract drafting, contract management, and dispute resolution, and acts as arbitrator, mediator, and dispute board member, and has experience of ICC, LCIA, SEC, DIAC, AAA, UNCITRAL, and FIDIC rules.
Thank you, Fanny. And I will introduce Ismail Essa. Ismail Essa is DRBF's current country representative for South Africa. And I should mention that next year we will have our international conference in South Africa, Cape Town, and Ismail will be chairing the conference. We thank him on our behalf again for all these efforts. He's a civil engineer as a professional background and has 43 years experience in the construction industry. He is serving as dispute board member and as arbitrator in various projects and disputes. He has been appointed as South African National Roads Authority Head of Transformation Unit in 2017 up until 2023. Currently, he runs the same entity's portfolio manager for special projects.
Thank you, Yasmin. For the contractor side, we are very pleased to have Mr. Jean-Marc Poulon. Jean-Marc is head of legal affairs of the infrastructure division of Bouygues Construction, a tier 1 construction group part of the 45 billion euro turnover French conglomerate Bouygues for 10 consecutive years. Before that, Jean-Marc led the legal department of the London-based subsidiary of the company for 6 consecutive years and worked within the group's ultimate parent legal department. Jean-Marc's experience and practice on large capital construction or industrial projects at first focused on drafting and negotiating complex contracts and gain all-round legal assist capacity of projects developed under project finance, PPP schemes, and more recently with an emphasis on litigating disputes involving such projects in courts, domestic and international arbitration, and alternative dispute resolution. Jean-Marc is one of the founding members of the newly created Association for Innovative Practices in Arbitration. So I think we have, yes, introduced all the panelists. Thank you for being there today and sharing your experience with us. I will now leave the floor to Aisha, who will moderate the panel of today. So thank you, Aisha.
You are mute, Aisha.
I think I'm out of practice with the COVID is too many years ago, and thank you for that. Thank you for the very kind and warm introduction, Yasmin and Fanny. And you've set the stage well for Ismail, Jean-Marc, and I to discuss appointment and look at it both from the employer side and the contractor side. And I'd like to kind of start by where Yasmin left off. She said there are specific criteria, including independence and impartiality, and the objective criteria, having the right experience, having the industry experience. But what other criteria do you, from an employer's perspective, Ismail, and then I'll turn to you, Jean-Marc, from a contractor's perspective, that you find critical and important to be available in your dispute board members?
Thank you, Aisha, and thanks to Fanny and Yasmin for the warm introduction. I'm not sure I deserve such kind words. Just from our side, I think the most important thing that we look for is people that are respected in industry and that do make a difference. They have the experience, they have the knowledge, the legal knowledge as well as the technical knowledge in trying to resolve a dispute. Disputes develop in many ways, but we need versatile people. We need people who that are respected in the industry, and their word carries a lot of weight in terms of the gravitas that they carry into the situation. And therefore we try to use as far as possible retired people, because they're not conflicted in any way. They're not seen to be batting for any particular side or anything of that nature. So we look at those, we look at the qualifications, both from a technical point of view and a legal point of view. We're not necessarily looking for lawyers, but people with a good understanding of contract law and construction law. Those are very important towards the resolving of disputes. Also, an important part is the persuasive power, because we're really trying to resolve a dispute between two and sometimes more than two parties to try and create a situation where they walk away from this either equally happy or equally unhappy. So that when they leave the situation, it's in a good space, that the dispute is resolved and we can move on. And as you know, the adjudication speed is one of the biggest problems, and the flow of cash into the project to keep the contractor going, especially, is critical to the success of the project from a contract point of view. The other issues that we look at is the chairpersons are very important, especially on the three-member panels. And we try and look for a chairperson with at least 20 or 25 years experience in the sort of dispute resolution process, and not too technical, but somebody that can control a meeting, in these kind of things, especially if you're going to have hearings. People can get a little out of hand, tempers rise, and emotions get carried away. So somebody can control the meeting and run with it. So those are important things as well. And then a balance in the panel as well, balance in terms of skills. You don't want all engineers, otherwise we end up talking too much technical stuff and we ignore the financial stuff. So you need a QS as well to try and balance things. So somebody with a good financial background, not necessarily an accountant type of person, but who understands the costing and things of that nature. So those are
I'm going to stop you there, Ismail, because I think we have quite an array of, we talked about the members, we talked about the chair, and we talked about the balance within the panel. So the characteristics and the things that you're looking for are, from an employer's side, are a multitude of issues that I'd like to get John Mark's comments from. Are these similar from a contractor's point of view, or do they diverge?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me as well. I realize I'm the only one which is not an engineer in the panel, so I'll try to keep up with you both, Ismail and Aisha. I think I would answer your questions, and you realize that maybe the goal is probably the same as the one which has been outlined by Ismail, but maybe with a different thinking or different journey. Where I and there are a number of factors or criteria that has been listed by Ismail, which are the same in our views, and we are sharing the same worries, which is the mix of skills, which is the gravitas, which is the ability to run proceedings, and the experience beyond the expertise. But the angle I just want to answer your question is the following. The dispute board issues, depending on how the drafting is of the clause, either binding recommendations or non-binding recommendations. It's all depending on how the contract is drafted. But where we see things being most efficient is when, whether it's binding or non-binding, it has to be the first and the last step of the process. Even though there is a multi-tiered dispute resolution provision, board might be followed by arbitration or might be followed by court. The intent for us is always to start with the board and finish with the board. I mean, getting to resolutions at this first step. So this is with that in mind that we would have our thinkings will be elaborated around the qualities that the members need to have. This is where, in practical terms, the translation of this is that we want to make sure that the person who will form the board when issuing their recommendations will somehow get us, both parties, to the conclusion that this is what we have to implement. We have to basically apply the recommendations of the board. As you well know, unlike an arbitration panel or a court, even if the decision is binding, it's only binding. It's not judged. It's not awarded. So it's still down to the parties to apply it or not. So that weakness of the boards, if I may say so, we try to compensate it by basically appointing board members who will basically make the parties thinking that, well, yeah, decisions they made make sense. It is very likely that it won't be overturned. So let's proceed and apply it. So that's the general thinking behind our approach to things.
This is very interesting because I see that Ismail said he wants gravitas, which you agreed with, and this persuasive power, and that's something that may be difficult to assess. How is it that you go about selection and identification of somebody with the right gravitas or the right persuasive power Ismail, how do you approach identifying that your potential member has the criteria that you are looking for and seeking?
Well, we try to use our own people in South Africa as far as possible, and we know them, and most of them come from a contractual background, being contract engineers and things of that nature. So you sort of develop, they develop a bit of a reputation over time with the experience and knowledge. So that's what we particularly use as a yardstick. But we also interview them to, and give them sort of problems and see how they can convince us, and which is really the best we can do under the circumstances in there. So the persuasive power is more on the experience and knowledge, and let's say the reputation they've developed over time. That's why the use of experienced and retired people is important.
Thank you, Ismail. And I think this leads us directly, your comment about choosing people from the local industry because you know their reputation, you know that their reputation precedes them, so to speak, and that they're more likely to be capable or have possessed the right skills and qualities or qualifications. But this leads to something that Yasmin mentioned about is nationality an issue? And I think this is somewhat a discussion topic and also a question that we have in our Q&A. And I'd like for John Mark first and Ismail to both comment on this. Because some of the MDBs want non-national adjudicators, so non-nationals of the contractor and non-nationals of the home nation of the project, of the borrower. Is this something that you keep in mind when looking to appoint dispute board members, John Mark? And if so, how has this played out in the selection process?
Well, in my experiences, certainly the employer has. I mean, in a number of dispute boards I've been involved in, especially in countries in North Africa, it was clear that the employer appointed nationals as their board member, with the clear mindset that those persons will be their Trojan horse within it was very obvious. It's not at all the way it should be played, and we all understand that it's not at all the rule of the game, but in practice that's the way it looked, and that's the way it has been played, which is counterproductive, and we talked about it in a different forum, but we'll touch on this I think later on. As far as the contractor would pick up his members or decide with the other members who would be the president, I think we would still this aim to make that process efficient and getting to a resolution which is applied by the parties. We'll probably try to avoid, as I'm working for a French group, as my name says it, and the name of my colleague says it, we would probably avoid a French person. We would probably have person of other nationalities, and also still with this efficiency goal, it wouldn't be unlikely for us to appoint someone who has more of an employer background, someone who had a number of expertise or experiences in his or her career with employers. Again, to somehow, whenever the decision is issued, convince the employer that the decision is right, sound, and should be followed. So it is very highly tactical, and it's not obvious. You would think that we would have someone who understands necessarily or would have 100% of his career within the contractor industry as a contractor. I think we would try to be tactical there and apply some sort of triangulation, if you see what I mean.
so it's not just a clear decision, the same size, the one size fits all.
No, not at all. And obviously nationality counts as well. You would not appoint, for instance, within the same panel, an Ukrainian and a Russian at the time being. They need to be able to talk to each other. So there's
you have to consider nationalities in more than just one way.
Yeah.
Ismail, have you faced MDBs saying that people of the same nationality cannot be participants in the boards? And how have you addressed this issue?
We haven't had that problem, actually, to a large extent, because most of the projects we self-funded. So we don't have a third party telling us who we should have. But on the issue of nationality, as I say, we've used mainly South Africans, but there've been DVs with some Australian representation, some European representation, and things like that. But that's on our much larger projects and more on the energy sort of power generation type of projects and things like that. But in our sphere as a roads authority, we haven't had that problem at all.
So as size matters, and if you're looking, and I'll just touch one more question on nationality before we go forward, because and it's a sensitive issue, because although you can select who you want, you're self-funded. When we talked about persuasion, Jean-Marc mentioned the Trojan horse, so to speak. And even if to be independent and impartial also requires an appearance of independence and impartiality, not just in fact. So how is it that you select members of the same nationality, but yet would be acceptable to international people, contractors of outside nationalities?
In general, the way we select is we have a Institute of Civil Engineers that have their list of members that they've pre-screened, interviewed, and set them onto the panel. And we, with both parties, select from there. Generally, on certain of our projects, we've actually listed names, 5 names, and from there, the two parties select the two members, and between them, they then select the chairperson from a separate list of chairpersons. So it's working fairly well. The people are accepting it. We haven't had a huge influx of international contractors. That is starting now. So those challenges are probably we're going to face soon. But up to this point in time, we haven't had that problem largely in South Africa. I know on the energy generation, which is our sister sort of organization, they have had some challenges, but they were overcome fairly quickly.
Thank
you. And I'm going to kind of draw on something that Ismail said, and the idea of having a balanced team. So having a QS, maybe somebody that has costing, somebody that understands the legal, somebody that can really help the entire project, and selecting the 3 members to be a balanced team together. How, in your experience, do the parties approach that? Do they work together to come up with the criteria and then identify people? Or collectively identify people and find a list and then use the selection that is the selection of striking out names or selecting names? Or can I ask both of you, starting with Jean-Marc, to comment on that?
Yeah, sure. Well, from what I've seen, we're not really conferring. I think when we know we're going to go to a dispute and appoint the board, or we have a standing board and it's appointed straight on after signing the contract, or while signing the contract, I think we would. Again, it's a question of tactic, as I see it. Either you shooting first, or you let the other party shooting first, and then you adapt. And I agree that in most cases, it would be wise to have someone for the law, someone for the technicalities, or engineer side of things and someone for the money. Let's put it this way. This is the three skills which has to be combined one way or the other. So if we're appointing someone because we think it's suitable person for the role, and he appears to be a lawyer, then usually the other party appoints one of the two other skills, and then together with the insight of the parties appointing them, the two members are appointing the third party, hopefully having the third skill.
So in your experience, the balance of the members of the board is an organic process as opposed to a structured going in process. Ismail, have you ever coordinated as an employer with the contractor in selecting all three members together?
Yes, we sat around the table. We had the names that we all looked at, and the contractors gave the input, we gave ours, and then we reached a consensus. This was because it was a very big project. There were 7 separate contracts on that, so you had 7 different contractors, consultants, and ourselves being the only common factor across the board. And we wanted one DAB for the entire 7 contracts. So there we sort of sat around the table and came up with the best. It was interesting to see the consensus amongst the contractors of who they wanted. The consultants were not that united and came up with good things, but the contractors definitely knew who they wanted. Either might have discussed this beforehand and came with a consensus opinion and choice. I'm not sure, but certainly there wasn't too much debate amongst themselves who they wanted.
Is this a process that you might recommend to others for standing boards and large projects, that the parties jointly look at the composition of the board?
I would think that's a very good process, because if you can agree on your board, it's going to be easier to sort of accept the decisions they make and accept the sort of guidance they give you, and especially in the avoidance side. If there's respect and the members have gravitas, definitely on the avoidance side, that would be a very big plus factor.
Well, if I may, my previous answer was obviously related to situations where we are to appoint an ad hoc board. I mean, once there is a dispute already ongoing, so somehow we've already sharpened our knives, and things are heating up. Obviously, in a different scenario where you have a standing board which is encapsulated in the contract, and you have to appoint them day one, we are still in the honeymoon, let's put it this way. So obviously this is where you can confer between parties and say, well, what are the roles and what are the expertise we need, and should we have a president who is a lawyer, or should the president be, I don't know, someone from the technical side or whatever. So that it is a very different approach, depending on whether you've got a standing board or you have a head of board, because the context is very different.
And that brings us to a very good point, because I think there is a shift in industry to look at the function of the boards as in their capacity to help the parties avoid disputes in the first instance, and not just be formed after the dispute has arisen in terms of an ad hoc situation. And so as an ad hoc board after the dispute has arisen. And I think maybe if we focus our appointment discussion on standing boards, because I think the industry in general, if we look at the FIDIC 2017, is inviting the parties to consider who their dispute board members may be and include a list in front. And I may ask you, if you're using the 2017 now, or experience in projects using the 2017, are you identifying potential dispute board members in the tender package or in the proposals? Ismail?
we're not using the 2017 as yet, but we are in our larger projects and more complex projects. We putting in a list of names that people can choose out of, and we give them the opportunity, if they don't like any of those on the list, to propose their own sort of names, or own members they would like to have. So it's more an advisory capacity that we put the names forward. It's not cast in stone that those will be your members. The chairpersons, we're a little bit more, let's say, strict on that. We say from these you'll have your chairpersons, but the members, we were more flexible on that. That's what we're doing, but that's something we've been experimenting with for the last 5 years or so. It's working fairly well, I believe. Thanks.
Thank you. And Jean-Claude?
If I understand correctly, your question, Aisha, you're wondering whether we are discussing this, or we are asked by the employer to discuss this at the bid stage.
At the bid stage.
Which I don't think I ever seen that before. At the earliest stages, we are discussing this is when, by luck, we are awarded, and then we are in the discussions of the terms and conditions, and at this moment between award and signing a contract, or sometimes there's some contracts having like a provision saying that you need to appoint your members within X days of signature of the contract. So that's early days of execution of a contract, or right before, between award and execution of a contract. That's where these things would be discussed. But I have never seen that being some sort of one of the criterias to appoint a contractor.
It is something that the 2017 FIDIC suite of contracts has introduced. And so if both parties haven't really faced this as of yet, it is something that may come in the future and may be thought about in the future. But let's go to some of the questions that are coming up, because Ismail was focused on the people agree with the balance of the board, but they were taken a little bit aback because not all of them, I believe, are as old as me and you, Ismail, on this panel. So they're saying, oh, 20 to 25 years experience, that is quite a bit. How is it that new people can, or people that have a little bit less experience can be also participating in dispute boards, and how would one prepare to be considered by you as a potential board member?
Okay, for that, on our large construction projects is what I've been talking about now. But our less, let's say, complicated project, which is a straightforward maintenance projects, or sort of asphalt overlays and things like that, which are less complicated and not so difficult, we bring in less experienced people there, with sort of 10, 15 years experience. So we start at the minimum of 10 years experience and moving up. So those are the ones where people sort of get experience and exposure. And further to that, we've also started what we call a pupillage. So we bring in people with 5 years experience with the requisite qualifications, technical qualification or a QS type of qualification, together with some training in dispute resolution. So either as a mediator or the adjudicator or an arbitrator. And then we pupil them onto the board. So the chair of the board, a 3-person board, would take responsibility for bringing these people in and training them and mentoring them and assigning them tasks. And we try and keep them onto this board for the duration of that board. So if it's a 3-year project, they'll be there for 3 years. If it's a 1-year project, they'll be there for 1 year. But we want a minimum of 2 years privilege so that we expose them. So there is a sort of ladder that you climb up to get to the top, and we assist you in that. And we do pay our pupils a stipend to be there. So it's not for free, but it's not what the chair would get or one of the full members would get. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very interesting and I think approach that brings in a new generation. Jean-Marc, as a contractor, do you have any such approach to bringing on new members into the dispute board world?
Well, there's two issues. New members, yes, sure. The question of their age and experience is another. We talked about experience, and experience doesn't come so quickly. So it takes some time, and you need to have a history behind you, whether as an employer or a contractor or both, or in another capacity as a lawyer. I think that's important for a board member to have to be able to fulfill the role. So very young members, and I had one experience which turned out not to be very good, especially that there was a board with only one member who was fairly inexperienced, and that made our life very difficult. But age is certainly an issue, I think, and at both ends of the spectrum. If you're talking about standing board or for a very large project, which can be in place for, I don't know, a decade, you wouldn't want someone which has 75, for instance, as well, because life has an end as well, as you know. So age is an issue, of course, and we think about that as well. But your questions about having new or younger or members from younger generations leads me to another thought, which is there is an overall comment I heard many times about having boards on smaller size projects. Because often people say, well, that's too expensive. I mean, it's large project spanning over years and with lots of potential for disputes. I think we can afford to have board, but for smaller one, that's not the same story. And I doubt this. I think there's value for money in having a board. I mean, the risk or the cost against the reward is very good. So maybe that would be one way to somehow innerve the limited word of international board members with new blood, younger persons, if they were somehow having their trainings also on smaller size project, I think.
Interesting. And we do have a very specific question on this, because this is a question to dispute board members, and a question that we have is about the fee. Is it this person is the dispute board appointment is being delayed because of the negotiation over the fee? How do you approach setting fees with your appointed dispute board members, and is there a long negotiation process?
Is that for me? I
Yes,
don't.
Jean-Marc and Ismail. I think this is for
Okay.
both of you. Because
we had one discussion once with one president who wanted to be paid significantly higher than the two other members. We felt a bit uneasy with that. Because first of all, we thought that all three members should have the same fees. First of all, maybe there are other politics in that respect, but that's the way we approach things. I think they should be paid the same. But the gap was so huge that we didn't make a deal with that person. And in all honesty, I don't think that person was so much interested into the job. So that's probably the reason why it was so stiff. But all in all, apart from that very specific situations, I don't recall discussion to the death on those things. I think there is a market, and there is an average fee. We know where we are, and I think it doesn't lead to endless discussions. I don't think so. As far as I've seen.
So you want, I mean, you are more comfortable with parity of the three board members, making the same or
Yeah.
charging the same fees.
Yeah.
Ismail, your comments on that, on the fees and the structure.
The way we operate is we give the chairperson between 5 and 10% more because he's got more administrative work to do and write up the reports and keep the minutes and things like that. So to compensate him for that, we do that. But what we do is we categorize our members into 4 levels or 4 grades. And we have a sort of range of a fee per level. So we said one of the most experienced, obviously, and let's say qualifications and things like that, we get the highest fees, and then we go down the line. And then we try and also convince the guys that we don't need all, let's say, the highest level guys from this project. We can maybe bring in 1 from there and 2 from a slightly lower level. We give a bit of mixture and also give that exposure and a bit more experience. So we set the fee almost in a grade, and we say you fit in there, so that's what we want to pay you. And if they agree, then that's fine. If they don't, then we look for somebody else.
So you know the fees that you're willing to pay, and they're not
Yes.
they're not based on.
Yeah.
But
And the tenderers also know that because we publish that into our documents as well. So when they're pricing, they know they're going to be paying people at that rate.
But I guess if you explain that you have a panel as well, so I guess for them to be on a panel, they have to agree that it's going to be according to that range within the panel. So your approach to things is fairly more industrial than mine, let's put it this way. and organized.
Well, I think there is a benefit to having panels and people applying to get on a panel, but then there are benefits to having an open list because sometimes panels take a long time to get regenerated and populated. And you need an open list, you need some specific criteria. So there are institutions that use panels for selection, and although that's not a topic of our discussion, but there are other institutions that that have an open list approach. So every appointment is made regarding the criteria that is made. For the specific characteristics that are being looked for or being sought on that particular appointment. I do have some questions that have come in. One is regarding that deals with gender diversity, and just of 3-member boards, have there been females appointed on your 3-member boards? I can say that I've served as a board member on more than one occasion, and so when I've appeared, I've been on boards.
With us, Asha, we've got a big problem with that. We have very few female members available in South Africa, so that is quite a big challenge for us to find female members. We are working on that quite diligently, and in our pupillage, we're trying to bring more females in. But at this point in time, all our boards are dominated to 100% males as we stand now. So that's something that we have to work much harder on to get more females in. And we're trying to do that.
And you're actively doing that within your pupillage and the other programs that you were talking about earlier.
Correct. We are pushing that quite hard.
Jean-Marc, in your experience around the world, I mean, Ismail's is very South Africa centric, and that's one view.
But that is true, and no one can contest that the construction industry is very dominated by male. It's I would suspect fashion industry. There's probably more women. It's one of the industry where men are still very the vast majority of individuals working in. At the risk of receiving a lot of boos, I will not appoint someone as a board member solely for having a board which is diverse or or which is representing I don't know, a different kinds of elements. That being said, if for a number of reasons a member occurred to be a female and had the good qualities for the disputes or for being a standing board on a project, that doesn't that doesn't put off at all. On the contrary, and I share a secret with you, Aisha, live. On one of the cases, we thought about you at some point in the past, and I realized that when we talked the other day. So maybe I'm a bit old-fashioned, though I'm not at all. But I still believe in the fact that only the character and the skills needs to be taken into account. And if it happened that a woman has those characters and skill, then go for it. There's no problem. I don't really like discrimination, either positive or negative. Let's put it this way.
Yeah, I don't, and maybe I'll add just a bit of my own. It isn't about. It is fully about qualifications first. And notwithstanding that, maybe we need to rethink the qualifications, because a lot of questions are geared towards, do we need somebody with 20 to 25 years experience? Maybe 10 to 15 can widen the pool and yet still maintain the right level of success in helping avoidance and quick resolution and persuasive decisions that stop at the first tier and resolve the issues. But and this is my experience as an engineer in this industry, who is in her 60s, so I've been around a little bit, and I can say that on air. Women, because we're not traditionally thought of, we may possess those qualifications, and if we're not positively like with the intention of thinking of looking for women that are qualified. So it's not to seek non-qualified people, but rather to open up your, not you, Jean-Marc, I'm not saying, but for parties to open up their prism a little wider, to say, yes, there are the possibility I can look elsewhere. And there is a suggestion for you, Ismail, to say, maybe if you're looking for more female adjudicators, why not open it up just a little bit to neighboring countries? Is that a possibility?
Yes, that is a possibility. We can look at that. Yes.
Yeah, so I'm not here to advocate for appointment of women, but I think it serves the parties to have diversity, and balance within a board can also include experience as an engineer, experience as a lawyer, but also experience in life and bringing solutions to bear in a different way. Now, I know that we're limited on time, and so I don't want to be, but I do want to ask each of you the question of what was the approach that was taken that you would to in the selection of your best experience with a board, and then I'll turn around and ask you what are your key tips for selecting the best board? And Jean-Marc, I'll start with you.
Okay. I think the key tips is still with the same goal to make it efficient. Ultimately, we're there for a result. One good example would be a domestic example I have in mind in France. where you may or may not know that in France there is very powerful administrative corps, like the Conseil d'État or the Cour des Comptes. And when you are facing, which is my position, public sector clients and French public sector clients, we know that they are very respectful of persons which had part of their history or background or career in one of those corps. So in France, I would say that even though they are public sector and we are private sector, I think it would be a very wise move to appoint someone from those corps, because that would probably educate the parties. They would probably say, well, they've come with that solution. This is their recommendations. We won't get any better from anyone else, from a court, from an education, from an arbitration. So one tip is definitely to understand, and in each country there are some specifics like this. We know there are people who are of a specific breed, let's put it this way, and we know they will have some sort of ascendancy over the other party. So that's one tip I would say. The other tip is don't worry about the Trojan horse. It happens because of people that are not used to use boards. Because the Trojan horse always fight back at the parties who is basically playing that game. Because naturally, out of the 3 members of the board, the 2 others will basically getting closer and somehow sideline the Trojan horse. And ultimately, that is to the detriment of the party who's playing that game. So never appoint someone with the aim to believe or think that someone will be your spy in a boardroom. Make sure it is someone who is well balanced, fair, equitable, has the right skills, expertise, and throughout the process, play the game as it should be played, i.e. you shut any contact once appointed. That's the board, who's the third party altogether, and you are just one of the 2 opponents or game players in front of the boards. That's my tips, I would say.
Thank you, Jean-Marc. And I'm going to turn to Ismail and ask for his tips.
From our side, the best board we had was 3 engineers, one being a contractor, spent all his life being a contractor. The second one was a consultant all his life, and they both had retired. And they were chaired by a third person that came from a mixed background, or mixed sort of experience, being initially a contractor and then became a member of a client body or employer body. And between the 3 of them, the decisions that came with the speed they came with it, and the accuracy of or let's say the persuasive power was so great that we almost had no disputes to look at. Everything was done on a basis of avoidance, and they worked extremely well. And I think the important part that we overlook is the 2 parties, the employer party and the contractor party accepted whatever came out of there, and they were very comfortable, although some of the decisions went against of the parties. They accepted in the spirit that it was given. So that was what was success for us. The construction background, the let's say the design background, and someone that had also been an employer for a while, who understood that aspect as well. So I think the balance in that manner worked quite well. Thank you.
It is really, this leads me to one of the questions here, because if you have a 3-member board that, and you have somebody from the contractor, somebody from the employer, so you're representing all the views and you can help the parties and be persuasive and avoid the disputes in the first instance. Would that lead you, if when you're thinking of appointing a sole member dispute board in a standing fashion, would that put someone who's had experience both from the contractor side and the employer side on an operational level, would that put them in a positive position or a positive consideration in selecting them as a sole member?
From my point of view, I think that's probably the best, because you're seeing both sides of the fence. You understand both aspects. The most difficult board, I think, is a 1-member board. You have nobody to debate with, you have nobody to discuss with. It's all, that person is going to make the decision and continue with that. So it's the most difficult board. Therefore, I believe that a 1-person one should be the most experienced person you can put in there. And the variety of experience also helps to a large extent.
Jean-Marc, would you agree with that, or?
Well, I was thinking about your questions and Ismail's response, and I say, oh, how much I hate board members with just one person. And similarly, I would never want an arbitration with one panel member. But the poorest experience I had was in the project in Morocco, where it's the same as I alluded to earlier, which is was a very inexperienced, a rookie in the world of a young French engineer, and who was doing that for if not the first time, the very first times, and he was the single board member, and that was disastrous, in many respects, in terms of skills for running the proceedings and in terms of news and gravitas. But generally speaking, I would try to avoid in all circumstances, and try to give the advice to everyone to avoid board with one single member, for a very basic reason. I think the truth often pops up from discussions between persons. I think we are far more clever in a collective group than on our own, and the risk of one person turning mad is far greater than 3 person turning mad.
Yeah, and you don't want one mad person deciding on your disputes. And this answers one question directly. It says, which one is better, 1 board member or 3 board members?
I think you have my answer.
I think I have your answer in spades. And Ismail, would you agree that?
I would agree with that. Yes, the 3 persons is far better than the 1 person.
Excellent. So I'm going to I know that we were slightly over the top of the hour, and I'm at the control of Yasmin and Fanny, and say, do we have more time to take questions, or should we wrap it up? I want to make sure that we're doing the right thing.
Aisha, I think we have another 5 minutes, perhaps 1 or 2 questions. Yes.
Okay, we will do that. And I will select questions from just randomly, because we have a lot of questions. I've tried to integrate them into our discussion. And I'm trying to, there's one from Joseph Mante, and his question is early involvement of the DAAB, somewhat along of the same lines as early contractor involvement. So I'm assuming in the tendering phase. And is this something that that either of the panel members has considered? Ismail, first to you, because I think this is an employer's.
Yes, we haven't considered that. When we say early, we want them there at the start of the construction phase. We don't necessarily appoint them in the design or tendering phase or procurement phase. Our preference is to have them as soon as construction starts. We haven't considered earlier than that.
Maybe the question is more during the works performance phase. I think when the dispute is not a dispute yet, it's more like a growing difficulties which might lead to a dispute, and then the question is whether we've experienced. Well, I would think that probably more a standing board having a role there ahead of dispute becoming a proper dispute. I would think so, and I think I had one experience where we had a standing board, and throughout the duration of the project, we came to the board and raised, or the employer came to the board and raised a number of issues. But I do remember that towards the end, they and we came to the board, and finally, naturally, through first exchanges with the board members, we took it back, and they took it back as well. So that is some way one of the pros of the standing board. It is educating the parties, or it is somehow helping them to behave correctly or towards each other.
And I'm going to go to next question then. It is, and it circles back to nationality, but it asks it from a different vantage point. And it's saying, if none of the dispute board members have the same nationality where the project is located, how are you sure that the dispute board members can avoid the disputes of the issues if the dispute board members may not be familiar with the country's regulations? Has that been, would that be a concern? I'll start with Jean-Marc, and then I'll go to Ismail.
Well, it depends on the nature of the dispute, really. If the dispute is, and it's often the case, more of a purely contractual nature, there is some legal background, obviously, which is coming into play, but it's a different reading of a provision sometimes, and or different understanding of facts. So I would tend to say that in that case, it is highly unlikely that that will cause a problem. This being said, my counterpart is usually a national corps or entity or a government body, public sector, and I never seen them appointing someone who is not from the country, to be honest. I think Ismail said it as well. So the risk of having someone having a panel with 3 members which are not from the country, I've never seen it, because it comes immediately, and it is the employer who appoints someone from the party, from the country.
I mean, I have to say, I have experience of boards where there is no one from the country that's appointed. And sometimes MDBs do require non-nationals from either side. So it can happen. And Ismail, I'll give you the word on this issue.
Well,
yes. Within the entity I work for, we didn't have that. I don't have that problem, but certainly in the power generation side, there was a board of 5 members who were all outside, appointed from outside of South Africa. Fortunately, it was a longer term one. It was a 5 to 6 year duration of appointment. And what was found in the beginning is that simple and easy decisions took long, let's say in the first 2 years of the duration of the board, because the guys had to do a lot of research and try to understand what the local sort of regulations way and rules and legal aspects way. But after that, once they got familiar, they got, the decisions start coming much faster. But in the early years of the project, it was a quite cumbersome and difficult until the guys found their feet and got a much better understanding. And I think the client also spent a lot more time with them, helping them understand the local rules and legislation. But
I think it's also depending very much on the context. If you had a board for a dispute between a public sector client and a contractor in France, for instance, where you have it, or in any other country where you have a very important part of the rules applying to your public sector contracts, which are deriving from, which are not basically in the four corners of the contract, which are implied by unrestricted law, which is something which is very important for us, and I assume it's the same in Spain or countries like Italy. I wouldn't dare having a board which would not include a public law specialist. So there you would have to have someone who is French, obviously.
So I think we circle back to there's the famous, it all depends. You really have to know the project.
Yes,
to know
the jurisdiction.
people, the jurisdiction. You have to know the audience, the people, the participants in the project, because at the end of the day, to select properly means that you can keep they'll have that persuasive nature, they'll have the gravitas, to help the parties make sure they don't escalate their disputes and resolve issues at that level, at the hopefully avoid in the first instance, and focus on the project success. If you have the right, they team with the project participants to have that success. It's been a pleasure and a privilege for me to join Jean-Marc and Ismail in this discussion, and I will turn it over back to Yasmin and Fanny.
Thank you very much, Aisha. Thank you very much, Mark and Ismail, for the wonderful discussion. We had over 20 questions, probably more, because there were some in the chat section as well. Thank you very much for addressing as much as you can. Of course, we are constrained by time. Fanny, I'll leave the floor to you for the announcement of the next thing in our calendars. And I thank also the audience for their continuous interest.
Thank you, Yasmin. Thank you to all the panelists. I am pleased to announce that our next joint event will be in Paris on the 26th of November. We will host a conference, CICA EIC conference, but also partnering with DRBF. The main topic is collaboration for construction projects. We will have the participation of NEC, FIDIC, and others. And the third session is really dedicated to dispute avoidance and resolution. So Andine has shared in the chat a link, because we also offer the possibility to join online. So you are all welcome to attend this event. So thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Take care, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.